Hello all, welcome to another session on JavaScript. In this session, we'll be looking at form handling using JavaScript. So, what is the focus in this session is form handling using JavaScript. So, what is that we are going to understand here is how to get the data from the forms that are being submitted by the user in our JavaScript code. So, what is our focus here is when the user submits something using a form, how to access that value within JavaScript and validate it. So it's again an introduction to form handling using JavaScript. We'll see how we can access the value entered by the user using various HTML elements inside our JavaScript code. Let's understand everything with code. Let's start off with a simple web page. We'll say form handling using JavaScript to be the title. And what we'll do is we'll take up a very simple form. So everything that we're going to write will be inside the form and exercise.html. Is the name for this page we are right now coding. So we're just going to stay on the same page. We're not going to request any resources from the server as such. Method, we'll use that to be post. Again, there's no use of this method right now since we don't have any server side code, but we then make it a habit since we have started working with forms. Finally, we're going to submit the data to some server side script. So that's why I'm mentioning method to be post and action to be exercise.html. And the event we are going to use is on submit for getting all the data from the forms and validating it. And we'll say return validate to be the method that will perform the validation in JavaScript. So this is our simple form that we are going to create. And inside the form, first we'll take a look at the text field, how user enters value through a text field and how we can get that in JavaScript. So we'll have a label and this is username. We'll ask the user to enter his username and we'll have this input type to be text. It's required. We'll have a name field for this, that is username, and we'll have an ID. We'll say that to be username. So we have created our text box, we have created our label. We'll have an submit button here. Input type is equal to submit and we'll give value to be submit. We'll also have the name to be submit. So you're able to see the output on the right hand side, username, that's the label, text box, and then the submit button. Now we should code our validate function. Now let's code our script. Now let's code our function, our JavaScript function validate. So let's write the script for that. Script. The function is validate. How is it you're going to access the value of the text field entered by the user? We use the element ID, get element by ID. The ID is username dot value. So that's how you access the value entered by the user. We'll call this using some variable inside JavaScript. I'll call this uname, that's username. So we have accessed the username and how we can check whether this value has been entered. Say sometimes the user may just enter spaces and submit. So we can perform this check. If uname dot trim, we'll trim the spaces dot length. If this equals 0, it means that the user has just entered spaces. Then we'll say document dot write, enter a valid username. Okay. So what is it we are checking? We are trimming these spaces out and checking if the length is equal to 0. Then it means the user has just entered spaces. And we give this error message to the user, enter a valid username, and we also return false. So why we are returning false here? Because the validation fails. So we return false. So on submit will not submit the data to the server. If the validation is fine, then we can return true. So let's check this output. Let's check for the scenario wherein the user enters a name, that's just spaces. Say he enters a space and then he submits. Enter a valid username. So what is that we understand from this exercise is we understand how to get the input entered in a text box inside JavaScript function, and then we can go ahead with our validations. If the validations fail, then you have to return a false, or else you can return true, so that on submit will submit the data to the server on getting a true return from the function. If it's a false, then the data will not be submitted to the server. It's going to be here, and the user can be asked to re-enter the data so that he enters a valid data. Are you all clear with this? So that's how you get input from a text box. Now let us see how to get the input from a radio option using JavaScript. So how to get input from a radio option in JavaScript. So the user will be submitting the data using an HTML form, and you'll be using a radio element to submit the data. And with a JavaScript function, we'll be able to identify what is the data that is being submitted by the user. So let's start with a simple HTML page, and here form handling using JavaScript. So that is the title, and we'll have a very simple form here. Action will be the same page, so we're going to be with exercise.html, and we'll have the method. So method, we'll have it to be post, and on submit we will call this function validate. So this is the JavaScript function which will accept the input from the form, and then it's going to display the value that has been selected by the user. So we'll have a label here is gender. We'll ask the user to select your gender, so that is the message. We'll have a break here, and then now the input type will be radio here, and we'll have the name. The name should be the same for all the radio options. This is very important. So you're going to have the name to be gender, and value, this will be used while we are submitting the data to the server side script. So we'll make it habit, say the value is male, and what will be visible to the user, that we are going to type male. So you're able to see the output here, and we'll have a break. We'll go to the, and we'll have a break here, and then we'll go to the next line. So it's going to be again a repetition of this. See, name should be gender. The name should be the same for all the options in radio, and here the value will be female, and what will be displayed to the user will be female. So we have created our radio options. Now we'll create our input type to be submit. We'll create our submit, and name for submit is submit, and we'll also have a value. Value will be submit. Finally, we have created a radio option with the submit button. You're able to see this. Now we have to write this function, validate function, which will identify whether the user has selected an option. If he has not selected, it will return false and also an error message to the user. So error message, for that we'll use a label here to display all the error messages, and I'll give an ID to be message. So what is the use of this label? To display the message to the user. If the user selects one of the genders, then that value also will be displayed. We'll be performing this using JavaScript. Let's write the script, and our function here is validate. It's a Boolean method. It will return true if the user enters valid data. It will return false if the user is not selecting any of the data. First, let's check whether the user has checked any one of these options. So how is that we are going to get the list of elements is we'll use document dot get element. We'll use document dot get element by name. So it's, what is the name we have given? Gender. So what is that we are trying to achieve here is document dot get elements by name. The name is gender, so it's going to get these two elements, male and female. So we'll receive the elements in some variable here, and now what we are going to do is we are going to browse through the list of elements, check if the user has selected any of the elements. So for let k of I, if k dot checked, then what we are going to do is we will set a boolean flag found to be true and return true. So what it means is we are traversing through the elements, and if an element is checked, then we are returning true. It means the user has selected an option, and initially found will be set to false. Let found equals false. So it's a boolean variable. If we find that the user has selected an option, we are going to return true. Meanwhile, we'll also populate the document.getElementById. by ID. We'll populate the message field dot inner HTML with the value, that is I dot value, k dot value. So what is happening here? We are checking whether the user has selected any of the options. If he has selected, we are setting the boolean to true. We are returning true, and we are also selecting a value. That value is being printed to the message. If the user has not selected any value, it means if not of found, if found was never set, then what we can say, document.getElementById, we'll have the message dot inner HTML. We can ask the user, select your gender. So that's the message, and then we'll return false. So there are two things happening here. One is we are traversing through the list of elements, checking if he has checked an element, then we set found to be true, and we display what value that he has selected, whether it is male or female. Where we are displaying it, we are displaying it in the label. If found was always false, then it means that the user has not selected in any one of the options. So we are saying select your gender in the message, and we return false. Let's check this. So user is not selecting anything, he submits select your gender. So this works. If the user selects a value, say if the user selects a value male, submit. So you're seeing male, and now the page is getting refreshed because the data gets submitted to the server, and we don't have anything on the server side. So we are not able to see the output permanently here. So for just viewing the output, what I will do here is I'll return false intentionally. So this is just for the demo. Actually, we should return true so that the data gets submitted to the server. So when you return false, just for the demonstration of the output, I'm returning false here. And when the user, see, when he selects female, so what is the option the user has selected? Female. If he selects male, that is male. If the user is not selecting anything and he submits, select your gender. So that's how you work with a radio option using JavaScript. What are the things? You should create a form, have some labels. Main focus should be on the name. The name should be the same for all the radio options. You should have a value. This will be using in our server-side script, and a submit button. And this method is a Boolean method. So what we are doing here, getting elements by name. So we're getting both these elements having the name gender. We are traversing through the list of elements, and you take every element and we check whether that element has been checked. So this is going to be true or false. If the element has been checked, we set our boolean to be true. We display the message to the user with the value. So this element has been checked, and k dot value will be the value. Say if it is male, it is male. If it is female, it's going to be female. And why did I return false here? Since we didn't have any server-side script, I just want the output to be on the screen, so I returned false. In the actual scenario, when you have a server-side script, this will be true. If it was never set, then we're going to populate selected gender to the message and we'll return false. I hope you are now clear with how to work with radio options using JavaScript. Now let's take a look at this demo on reading checkbox values in JavaScript code. So we're going to have an HTML form, and we are going to provide the user with some checkbox options. When the user selects some options, we're going to get the values inside JavaScript. If the user is not selecting any of the options, we're going to tell the user, please select an option. So let's start with a simple HTML page. And here it is. The title is form handling using JavaScript. Let's start coding this simple form. Form action is will be on the same page. So it's exercise.html is the name of this page. Method we'll use is post. And the event we are going to call is on submit. We'll be calling this function validate, which is a Boolean method which will return true or false. Now inside this form, we're going to have some label to tell the user to select his subjects. So we'll ask the user to select his subjects. Select your subjects. And we'll have a break here. Now we'll provide the checkbox options to the user. So input type is equal to checkbox. And we'll have a class for all the input options we are giving. I'll give the class to be, say, checkbox. So I'm just giving some name here, checkbox. And name field is important. We have to say it's an array of elements that will be populated. Say a user can select many options here. So here the name denotes an array of elements. So you have to mention it's an array. The next important thing is value, which will be sent to the server. So for this first subject, let's say it's chemistry. So that's the value that will be populated to the server. And what will be visible to the user, that is chemistry. So you're able to see the output to the right. Select your subjects. The first option is chemistry. Like that, we'll have some 4 options. Let me replicate this. So the input type for all the options is checkbox. Class will be the same for all the options. So class is checkbox. Name will also be the same. It's an array of elements. And value will change. Let's say chemistry, and then we can have physics here. Maybe here we can have Java. And here we can have English. So these are the values, and what will be displayed to the user, we have to change that. It's physics, and this is Java, and this is English. So we have almost completed our input options. The next thing is we should have an input type to be submit, and the name will have the name to be submit. And we'll also have a value. Value is submit. Next, we'll have a label for giving the message on what subjects the user has selected, or if he's not selecting, we have to give them an error message. So we'll call this with an ID to be message. So this label will be used for displaying the option selected or some messages to the user. Our HTML form is done. Now let's write the script. So let's go with the JavaScript code. And what the script contains is this function validate. It's a Boolean method. It will return true or false. Say we'll call this function validate. And in this function, what we are going to have is we're going to get all the elements with the class name checkbox. So we are going to retrieve all these elements, and then we're going to loop through the elements and check which are the elements that are being checked. So first we'll get all the elements. For this we'll use document.get elements by class name. What is the class name? It's checkbox. And we will denote all the elements using this variable subjects. Now what is our next thing is we should traverse through the list of elements returned for let I of subjects. So we'll use a simple for of loop here. We'll traverse through all the elements. So how many elements you are going to get here? 4 elements you are going to get. And how to check whether an element has been checked? We'll perform this check if I dot checked. So if a user has selected chemistry, that is the first element, then I dot checked will be true for that element. If an user has selected a specific element, we will write it to the label document dot get element by ID. What is the ID for the label? It's message. We'll populate the value to the inner HTML, and we are going to just concatenate to the inner HTML because a user can select multiple elements here, say chemistry, physics, Java. So we should be continuously concatenating the output to the label. So we'll concatenate I dot value. So what is I dot value here? Say if the user selects chemistry, the value chemistry will be concatenated to the inner HTML of the label. Next, when the user also selects physics, that will also be concatenated to the inner HTML of the label. So here, we're just going to determine whether the user has selected any options. For this, we'll use a Boolean value found is equal to false. We'll set this Boolean to be false. And whenever an user has selected an option, we'll set found to be true. So by this way, we identify whether the user has selected any of the options. If found was never set, if not a found, what we can perform here is we can document.get element by ID. We'll use the label again dot inner HTML. We can say to the user, select your subjects. So that's the error, and we'll return false here because he has not selected any of these subjects. If he has selected at least one, we'll return true. So what we'll do is, if found was set, we can just go with the else part and then say return true. That's it. That's our JavaScript code. What we are trying to perform this code is get all the elements by the class name checkbox. We'll run through the elements, check if the user has checked any of the elements. If he has checked, we'll concatenate the value to the inner HTML of the label, and then we'll set the Boolean to be true. What is the use of this Boolean? If the Boolean was never set to true, it means that the user has not selected any of the options. So we will return false, and we will also populate the label with an error message, or else we'll return true. Now let's run our code. Let's see whether it's working fine. So the first scenario is user has not selected anything. Let's submit. Select your subjects. So found was never set, and we are populating the message with the label with the message select your subjects, and we are returning false, so the data is not submitted to the server. The next condition is user selects, say, chemistry, physics, and Java. And once when he submits, you're able to see the output, but then the page gets refreshed because an action, a request is made to the server side, which we have not written anything. So that's because of this true. When we return true, a server side request gets submitted and the page refreshes. Just for the demonstration purposes, I will return false here too. So I'm performing this intentionally just to see the output of a demo. When you're having a server side script, this is going to be true. Okay. So when you return true, the data will be submitted to the server, and the PHP script or some server side script is going to take your data and populate it to the database, or it's going to manipulate it. So that is the real scenario. But here, since we are just working with JavaScript form handling, I'm intentionally returning false here to check the output. So let's now check. We'll have chemistry, physics, and Java. Submit. So you see chemistry, physics, Java. That is chemistry, physics, and Java. The values are getting appended to the inner HTML of the label. So that's how you get the input from the checkboxes into your JavaScript code. I hope you were able to follow this. Now let's move on to the next concept. The next concept is on getting input from a drop-down box in HTML. That is, you have a select option and the user selects one of the options. And how is that you're going to get the value for that select option in JavaScript? So let's focus on that. Let me delete this. The next option we are going to focus on is a demo on getting select input from HTML into JavaScript methods. Let's start with a simple web page. And what is the title here? Getting select option input in JavaScript. So again, we'll start off with this form. Action is will be in the same page, exercise.html, and method will be post, and on submit is the event. On submit, we'll have this boolean method return validate. So we are going to get the input that has been submitted by the user using the HTML form inside this method. And here we should have our select option. So we're going to give the name to be country and ID to be country. And we'll also say it's required. So it's mandatory for the user to select an option here. Now we will give the options. The very first option is going to be just an instruction to the user. This option will be by default selected, and this will be disabled so that the user cannot select this option again. And it has got no value. So we're not going to give any value because it's just going to give an instruction like select an option below, something like this. So this is just an instruction. So that will be by default selected and available to the user. So once when the user selects a value from the drop down, they will not be able to again select and submit this as an option. So you'll understand this when you're going in for the demo. Let's go in for some more options. Say we'll have the next option to be India. Value is India, and what's available to the user is India. Like that, we'll have some countries here. So next country, we'll have it to be US, and the user sees US. The next country is UK. The user sees it as UK. So this is the simple select option that we have created. And you can see this is how it looks on the screen. So that is the output. So user should be able to select one of the countries, but this is disabled. See, you can't select an option again because we have disabled it. And by default, this is the selected option for him. So this is the meaning of this. When I give selected, when the page loads, by default, select an option below will be the message to the user. Now, how to get this data that the user selects in JavaScript? So we'll write the script here. And after selecting, the user will also have a submit button. So let's have a submit. Input type is equal to submit, and the value is submit. We'll also have name. Name is submit. If you want to give an instruction to the user, you can also add a label. Label country. We can say select your country. That's it. So let's take a look at the output now. So you have select your country, and user selects one of the options and he clicks on submit. Now on submit, what we have to do is we have to get the value submitted by the user in JavaScript. So the function we are going to use here is validate. It's a boolean method. And how you can get this value is we can use the ID, document.get element by ID. The ID that we are given here is country.value. So whatever country the user selects will be populated now in JavaScript. Let's say constant country. So whatever value the user selects will now be part of this variable inside JavaScript. Maybe we will write it to the web page, right? We'll say the country you have selected is so we're just writing this to the web page. Let's take a look at the output. This country you have selected is India. Got it? So we were able to get the value selected by the user, and we are able to read it. Say we can return true here. Return true in the sense just saying, okay, we are fine with it. Let's submit the data to the server. Are you all clear with this? So what we have done, retrieve the value using the document.getElement by ID and the ID for that select option dot value. So user selects a value and that's coming here to country, and we are writing that back to the web page. Why we are returning true here? So that the data can be submitted to the server side. So let me show you the output again. Submit. So the country I've selected is US. Are you all now clear with how to use select option alongside JavaScript? Fine. Let's take one more demo on form handling, that is how to get range slider input in JavaScript. So we all have this input type is equal to range in HTML. When the user selects that, how to get the value selected using the input type range slider within your JavaScript code. Let's start with a simple web page here, and here we're going to say getting the input from range slider in JavaScript. Now let's create a form. Action is exercise.html. Method as usual will be post, and on submit we are going to call this method return validate. And here we'll give a label, just an instruction to the user. Let me call this label to be communication. So I'm going to select the level of communication skill attained by a student here. Normally I use this when I give letter of recommendations to students, so that's the inspiration behind this demonstration. So let's say select the communication skill level, and we'll have a break here. Next we'll have this input type to be range, and it starts with a minimum value of 1 and maximum value we'll have it as 10. And steps, in steps of 1 we can increment it, and value here will be initialized to 1. And we'll have a name field. Name is communication, and ID also will have that to be communication. Okay, so our input type range is done, and we'll have the end, we'll have this break, and then we'll have an input type to be submit. So on submit we are validating, so input type submit, we'll have value to be submit and name to be submit. So our form is ready. How we are going to get this value in JavaScript? For this we'll write the script. The script, we're going to use the ID of the input element. So here ID is communication. It's very simple. So we'll have this function validate, which is a Boolean method, and we'll use document.getElement by ID, and the ID we have given is communication dot value. That's it. So whatever value the user selects will be available, and we'll say constant a skill level, something like this. And we will also write it document.write the skill level selected is, we'll just give the skill level as the output skill level. After that we can return true so that data can be submitted to the server. So that's it. We have declared a range slider. It takes a minimum value 1, maximum 10, increments in steps of 1. So by default it will be in the position 1, and name and ID we have given that to be communication. And inside JavaScript we are just using document.getElement by ID dot value to get the value selected by the user, and we are just writing the value back to the web page, finally returning true so that the data can be submitted to the server side script. Now let's refresh this. Let me select 1, it's now 2, 3, submit. The selected skill level is 3. So that's how you get the input from a range slider in your JavaScript form. I hope you're very clear with this. Next, let's see how to get the input from a calendar object from the input type date in HTML in JavaScript. So let me delete all these things. Let's start off fresh. So it's demo on getting the input date in JavaScript from an HTML form. So let's start with this demonstration. This demonstration will be on getting date as an input in JavaScript. So as usual, you create a form. Action will be in the same page, exercise.html. Method is post. On submit is the important event we are trying to understand. That is, we'll use this boolean method validate. And here we're going to have a label for the user, say join date. Say the user selects his joining date. Select your joining date, and we'll have this input type date here. It's required for the user to select, and we'll also have a name field that is join date, and we'll also have an ID that is join date. That's it. Next we'll have an input type submit, so everything gets validated on submit. Value to be submit and name to be submit. Now when the user submits, we should get the date submitted by the user. For this, we'll write the script. The script has this function validate, and here we are going to get the date selected using the ID. So it's going to be like this: document dot get element by ID. What is the ID here? Join date dot value. So now you're getting the value entered selected by the user using the date input, and we'll call this constant join date in JavaScript. Now how to map this to a date in JavaScript? We can say constant d is equal to new date. So that's how you create a date in JavaScript, and then you pass the join date that has been entered by the user. So we'll write the date out to the web page. We can also extract some parts of the date like document.write d.get full year. We can extract some parts of the date like shown d.get date. So we can work with the date object inside JavaScript once we are able to get that. So document.write maybe d.get month. Let's see whether we are getting the output. Finally, we'll return true since it's a boolean method. Things are fine. We'll return true. Let's take a look at the output now. So we'll select today's date, submit. Okay, there's a small error here. That is, these are methods. So we should give the method call like this. And now let me refresh this. Again, let me run this. So select the date, submit. So you're able to see the date D. So this is the output D, the Sunday, February 26th, the date is displayed. And here 2023 is the year that we have extracted. And 26th is today's date. So that is get date. Get month here represents 1. Since month starts from 0 in JavaScript, 1 is Feb. So you can extract parts of the date and work with the date inside your JavaScript method. I hope you have understood how to get the date input from an HTML form inside your JavaScript. So that's it for now. We have discussed a lot of concepts. We have seen how to get input using a text box, input using a radio button, input from the checkboxes, input from a select option, a range slider, and input using the date object. I hope you were able to follow all the concepts we have discussed so far. If you have any questions, you can leave your comments below. And that's it for now. Thank you all for listening. Take care.